we've been on a journey.
Yeah.
I think I was prepping for today's call, and Gary and I kind of laugh. Has it been 10 years? Has it been 12 years? Has it been 14 years? I saw, ironically, because I think today is, the 19th?
Yeah.
So 2008, so November 20th, so tomorrow, 2008, was the first video you posted of me talking about an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yep.
And I had mentioned earlier, Gary and I lived at that time up in Northeast Ohio, a eastern suburb of Cleveland, 3 miles apart, had never met, didn't know each other. I was part of a founding team of an organization in Cleveland called Jumpstart. Looks a lot like NC Idea. See a theme here? But in 2004, that model was novel. It was unique. And that's what got me recruited to, the big leagues, if you'll excuse that metaphor, which Kauffman is for a lot of people, right? Because big foundation, billions of dollars, resources to do things like Global Entrepreneurship Week. And we had a clipping service. And some upstart company had the audacity to put a program out into the free world, addressing entrepreneurial mindset. And our clipping service, snagged it. And my then boss at Kauffman comes into my office, and she's like, have you ever heard of this organization? I'm like, no, why would I? And she's like, well, don't you live in Mentor, Ohio? And I was like, yes. Well,
which is a suburb of Cleveland.
Yes, yeah.
Uncle Cleve's name was Cleveland Mormon.
Oh, that's...
Just saying.
That's a dad joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, spoiler alert, I'm not a son of the South. Sorry. I'm one of those Buckeye imports. So Gary tells this story a little differently when I reached out. He says I was all arrogant, like, how dare you have the audacity, and who are you, and what are you doing in my space? I like to think of it as I was naturally inquisitive, and I was ruggedly adapting to understand what this pluckish upstart was up to, and that's how we met. And in a moment of seriousness, Gary is right. In the stories, like, we were both tracking on the same thing. My body of work, I had the good fortune before, the second half of my career, I always bifurcate my career. First half, I was doing startups, and I worked in venture-backed companies, and, we exited, we started new. And then I spent the second half of my career helping others do likewise. And so I, too, had seen this power of a mindset. I'd seen the status quo underserving, in particularly historically underserved groups. I saw this, it's what became the epiphany for the quote that you saw on the bookmark in all of your books, our greatest natural resource is the entrepreneurial potential of people. And I was wondering how in the hell I'm going to solve this problem, and then I run into this guy. And he's like, yeah, I have all that mapped out. I feel similar.
Well, I didn't have it mapped out. I was maybe a couple of steps ahead of you, but...
You were. And so having the resources we had, we did a PRI. We acted, we being Kauffman, the royal we, were the funders for the creation of the Ice House program through a program-related investment. That's how philanthropy can do and fund this kind of stuff, act like an angel funder, but it's even better terms, for the entrepreneurs that get the money. And so we started this journey together, and boy, is it taken us places around the world. I mean, I can tell you, I had the good fortune of sharing the Ice House at the United Nations General Assembly. And you want to talk about a universal language, entrepreneurial potential, and sitting, in front of that. You've all seen it on TV, right? It's more daunting than it looks like on TV. All of a sudden you're very aware of your language when you know that your words are being translated into 40 different languages. And how do you convey these kind of universal, things like entrepreneurship, right? And what does that mean? Because it's a French word, but the Americans really defined it, right? And it does not translate universally. At some point, in my work at Kauffman, I was sent to majority Muslim countries as kind of an unofficial action of the State Department. The whole idea there being like empowerment, generating grassroots empowerment. If you could, affect people with entrepreneurial thinking. And in a lot of countries, and in particular majority Muslim countries, there are cultural restrictions to that.
Well, let me just tell you a story about that, Tom. I was in Azerbaijan for the State Department to do some entrepreneurial mindset training. And they had an embassy driver come and pick me up in a hotel room, and I'm, sleep deprived, jet lag, whatever, and I'm in the back of the embassy car, and the guy's driving me to this venue where I'm about to give a talk like this, and the guy's telling me, the driver's telling me, like, asking me what I do, and I'm having a conversation through the rearview mirror. You know how you do that in the back of a car? And the guy goes, I tell him what I'm doing, and he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Gary, that's not possible here in Azerbaijan." And I went, "Oh, shit, maybe I just found the edges of this." And so now, like, I got all nervous. I'm walking into a room of 400 or 500 people. I don't understand the culture, the cultural barriers. First girl that walks up to me, she's got like a bridal empire that she started with $200.
Yeah.
Right? But to your point, Tom, there are cultural barriers that are different from country to country. There are logistical barriers, government policy, whatever. But the spirit and the thing is the same.
It's human empowerment, human flourishing, as you and I like to talk about.
It totally is.
And so so that's really the impetus for mindset and why we've based our mindset program on this program, Ice House, and with a goal to get 100,000 people empowered with this entrepreneurial thinking. And I want to be very clear. I said it in my opening keynote. An entrepreneurial mindset is not a business skill. It's a life skill, right? You don't have to aspire to go start something to benefit with from an entrepreneurial mindset. You could be working at one of the state's largest employers and still be served well through an entrepreneurial, mindset. So we see it as our top of funnel, the gift we can offer anybody in the state, because we're blessed with great facilitators, who we just heard from, right, that can help us share this gift broadly and redefine best practices in economic development, which is now, we're going to land this plane between you and I in the new book. So, we had figured out, we traveled the world, literally traveled the world, helping, let's just use the word students, people get the Ice House course. But then over the years, as Gary and I are apt to do, we have a standing call every Saturday morning to talk about solving problems of the world. There was the missing component was understanding from an economic development standpoint.
Right on.
How is this a pillar, and a big, important one? That's the essence of the book. And it's a great book. I personally think chapter 13 is the best chapter in the book. They're all good chapters. Let's be honest. They're all good chapters. But chapter 13, and all kidding aside.
But you're going to miss it if you don't get the runway up to it.
Yeah, read it all. But really what it was at the end, I wasn't your Lamaze coach getting this book, but I was pretty close to one. Over the years, evolving points. You texted me at
10 years
in the middle of the night. Like, how do you think about this?
Well, let me put it to you this way. Like, only a fool would undertake such a task. Like, the entrepreneurial mindset is such an amorphous concept. Who in their right mind would even attempt it? I want to say this. Look at what's the subtitle of that book? It says, "The Hidden Logic That Unleashes Human Potential." Now, I would forgive you if you're walking by it in the bookstore and said, that sounds like hyperbole. I dare you to read that book and tell me otherwise.
By the way, speaking of that book, this is the launch event for it. You won't be able to buy that in a bookstore until January.
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
But we had to pull some strings with the Penguin Random House to get the books here. Assure them it's a private event so all the book vendors don't get all out of shape and whatnot. That's Tom's doing.
Yeah, it was our pleasure to do so. And like I said, it's meant from our perspective, if it were in my power, I'd have every economic development organization, entity, individual, anybody that's even close, read this as the how-to manual.
And I use NCID as an exemplar because the work NCID and Tom is doing is blazing new trails in economic development. But I also show examples of ordinary individual people in urban communities, in rural communities, that take it upon themselves to start an ecosystem. And this is something anyone can do. I'll talk about a guy named Myron Pierce who's doing it like in the inner city in North Omaha, like helping urban entrepreneurs launch their businesses. He did it in Colorado Springs. He did it in Kansas City. Now he's doing it in North Omaha and South Central LA. I show an example in there, Jim Carell, who's doing it in rural Kansas, a guy that took Ice House in a town of 10,000 people, raised $1 million to build a learning center in his town. It transformed the economic landscape of that community. One guy.
These are the interventions we're talking about and hopefully will inspire through the book. Our journey will continue, but for the moment, I'm going to see if there are any questions from the audience. We've got 2 folks with microphones.
Got one guy over here.
I was going to say, if you're going to be shy right now, Gary will fill the time.
Eric's got something. Come on.
My name is Stanley, and my question for you is about time and consistency. I've been an entrepreneur now for 3 years, okay, and I'm beginning to realize that what I do with my time and how consistent I am matters. So I want to hear from you, am I correct? Is this something that is true for entrepreneurs, that they need to really care about time and consistency and be okay with things taking longer than what they expect?
Well, things always take longer than expected, but let me get back to the time thing. I'm going to answer it differently. You know, one of the things I observed in entrepreneurs is they're much more likely to think about their own thinking. Psychologists call that metacognition. And I don't have any data to support this, but I think that that's what happens when you're functioning autonomously in an ambiguous environment. That you have to think about that. Like, what's the highest leverage? What's the highest leverage thing I could be doing with my time? I mean, it's a beautiful question. Of course you're on the right track. But what your question reveals is that you're thinking about, like, how to make yourself more efficient, more effective. You know, Warren Buffett put it this way. You got a guy over here with a 400 horsepower engine, but he only knows how to get 100 horsepower out of it. Y'all know people like that, don't you? You got a guy over here with 200 horsepower engine, but he knows how to get all 200 horsepower out of the engine. He's better off. The entrepreneurs like you, they're getting 250 horsepower out of their engine because they're thinking about their own thinking. They're always trying to figure out how to maximize. But let's not lose sight of something. This is all happening because you've got a compelling goal in your mind that you're trying to get to. And it's that goal in your mind that you're striving towards that's causing you to behave that way. Thank you.
I want to get a word in and just basically say, as we do through our labs programming, Alan Younger and Carlo, do a great job coaching and helping through programming our micro and seed grantees. And I know part of what we do there is basically make sure you understand that time is your most precious resource. You will make money, you will spend money, you'll do many other things, but you cannot save or bank a unit of time. It comes and it goes. And my observation has been that the most successful entrepreneurs I've worked with understand how precious of a resource time is, and so they don't waste it.
You should also read Naval Ravikant stuff about maker's mind versus manager's mind. You need to allow yourself some space to think and reflect and so forth.
Other question?
Hello, my name is Eric Stevenson. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and I want to call myself a serial entrepreneur. I joined the Navy in 1992 right out of Durham, North Carolina. And previous to that, I lived with my grandmother as my mother was going to school to get her education because she had 3 kids as a single parent. And we were in Vanceboro, North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. And I was sharing with Gary earlier that the first time I had a bathroom inside my house was in 4th grade. when I moved to Durham. So we grew up with an outhouse behind the house. And I learned that you don't know you're poor until you go to school. We thought everybody had an outhouse. So we found out we were poor when we went to school. So moving from East North Carolina to the big city of Durham, there was a lot of different challenges, right? So to kind of fast forward to my question, leaving the military, retiring, I started a consulting firm, business consulting, teaching people how to use social media for business and going in and problem solving inside your business. Did that for a few years. Pandemic hit. I was working as a federal government employee, making $90,000 a year. And literally when the pandemic hit, me and my wife had a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old. We were unsure about daycare. I put in a 2-week notice. And I ended up starting another company, taking people from Fayetteville, North Carolina, to the airport. You can't catch an Uber. You can't catch a Lyft. They will not come get you. You're going to be stuck. I found a problem. So I was excited, and I went to some conference that NC State had put on in Raleigh, looking for money as an entrepreneur, right? Trying to find money. Oh, yeah, I'm going to get some money. I'm going to get some vehicles. Every breakout room I went into, there was no money. So me just remembering my grandmother and things that she fought through, I bought 2 Teslas and said, hey, screw it. You know, I don't curse. I know y'all use a different word. I said, screw it. I went and bought the Teslas. So the problem I find myself in now is I do the consulting on this day. I'm taking people to the airport at 3 in the morning sometimes, and I'm just grinding for my family because it's just what I have to do. And I find out sometimes I haven't worked on the consulting thing for a few days. I haven't worked on any marketing for the transportation company, and I feel stuck a lot of days to where it's like maybe I should just quit both of those things and go get that easy $90,000 a year federal government job, you know, on post in Fayetteville.
That'll crush your soul.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is I resigned because I was working from home during the pandemic, making $90,000 a year with a 1-year-old baby and a 6-year-old running around the house, and they wanted the same performance. And we would have these calls, and everybody on the call, the general from Fort Bragg at the time would say, how's everybody doing? Everybody's like, man, we're killing it. You know, we're doing it. And I'm like, am I the only person at home with a baby crying, a 6-year-old that won't sit down, and I can't work at the same level? You know, so shout out to any stay-at-home moms or all the moms out here. It's the hardest job in America. So I just feel stuck some days, and you know, I'm an ice house facilitator, and I'm super excited about facilitating and teaching people the entrepreneurial mindset. But I just want some advice to kind of, I want to not feel stuck. So
here's what I would say, Eric. You know, I interviewed this guy. He was in his 90s. He was the oldest venture capitalist in the United States at the time, David Morgenthaler. He invested in Steve Jobs in a Series A round. That's how old this dude was. And he said, looked at me, I got a camera going, the whole thing, looked at me, he said, the world doesn't give a shit about what you want to do. He said it to me just like that. And the first rule of entrepreneurship is like, you got to figure out what other people want and need. And the minute you stop paying attention to that, that's why business planning's not good. Because you get focused. In medicine, they call that premature diagnostic closure. Right? So maybe you're doing your thing and it ain't going as fast as you think. But if you're not thinking about, like, how is this useful? Do people need this? Maybe they need that. I'm increasingly convinced, and you can listen to my podcast, The Entrepreneurial Mindset Project, your idea doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Get in the arena. Start interacting with people trying to solve problems. You get too fixed on what you think you're doing and you stop listening, that's not good.
And I'm just going to add, take the time to recharge. You know, we neglect ourselves last. I made that mistake. I lived that cliche. If I wasn't working 100 hours in my startup, I must be slacking. And in hindsight, and I can say this with the benefit of experience, personal experience, those weren't always the best decisions, right? And finding that balance. So in a very practical sense, let me just say, you have all these tasks you're doing, and related to the last question about your time and protecting your time, Find what you're doing that's giving you the greatest return. Do more of that and do less of what isn't. And I don't mean to be just short with that, but
I think
no, I'm going to give privilege right here to one of my bosses.
You got it.
Yeah, he
Spencer.
says that.
We
But
got another one in the
we
back.
know who's the real boss. Gary, so you put these two books out, so Who Owns the Ice House? And then now we have this entrepreneurial mindset. And I was wondering if you could just kind of distinguish between what do you hope the reader imparts between the two? In other words, let's say an entrepreneur has a limited amount of time. Which one of these should they be reading, and what do you hope they're going to gather from either one of them?
Yeah, so Ice House, good question. So Ice House is sort of an entry level. Those 8 life lessons are what an anthropologist would call cultural themes. They're these common and consistent underlying beliefs that drive the behavior. And Ice House is like easy access. You can get it, boom. The new book is a leadership book.
I'd say that, the way we're looking at it and the way we're using it, for everybody that's an ecosystem partner, engaged partner in this room, the new book is your book, and the Ice House book is for the people you serve.
That's a good way to look at it.
That's really how we're doing it. I think we have time for one last question that was in the back, Barry.
Okay, I'm Cynthia Hayes again. Quick question. I heard a couple of themes. One being building an ecosystem. The other is solving a problem that exists. So most people in this room, being an entrepreneur, have discovered what they believe is a true problem, but we're sitting in isolation, perhaps, in our own corners of the world. So how do you, and yes, I did stand up and say I'm looking to build an ecosystem, but what advice would you give to help find your tribe, connect with your people, to begin to develop that true ecosystem? Because once you read the books and you understand that there is some value to what you're bringing to the market, the next leap is to engage and begin the work collectively as a part of an ecosystem. So what advice would you give to do that?
I think you're answering your own question. And here's what I mean by that. You're here. So much of this is showing up. It really is. So many people, I cannot even tell you how many people I talk to that won't get over that hurdle of showing up. You're an entrepreneur. You already said in one of your questions earlier today what you're trying to do, right? I think it was Tom Snyder that called you out and said, hey, to the ecosystem partners in the room, look her up. I don't know, maybe at a function that's going to be here in less than an hour, right? It's engagement. That is half of this work. I can tell you as someone who put, 9 figures ish, is that over 100 million, into ecosystem building on a national scale. It's not rocket science. It's showing up. It's building your tribe, your squad. It's why we do this every year. So at least once a year we come together for this family reunion and catch up on how the kids are doing, right?
Well, can I answer the question from a different perspective? One way to think about it, and this is like sacrilege at an ecosystem summit conference, but you don't need an ecosystem. You need revenue. You need customers. And finding customers is how your ecosystem will occur. Like, what kind of ecosystem did Uncle Cleve have? Right? Sometimes you got to go alone. I interviewed an entrepreneur once, and he's a Harvard case study, right? The guy started selling clothing in college, used clothing, John Osher. And he said to me, I could answer any question about entrepreneurship with the same 3 words. Find a way. How do I get in Walmart? I don't know. Find a way. How do I don't know. Find a way. Build your own ecosystem. Find your tribe. I guess my point to you is, don't think the absence of an ecosystem is going to stop you. The minute you think you need an ecosystem, you're screwed. Just keep going.
And luckily for you, you're in a state with a really good ecosystem. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you to Gary.
Thank you.
I think we set you up with a table during the resource fair and the reception. So if one or two of you want a signature from the author, I'm thinking we can make that happen. And obviously you'll have a chance to talk to him some more. So please take advantage of that. And our resource fair partners, there are several of the tables there are our sponsors, which I'm going to thank once again. And there's a few other folks that are service providers. So whether you're an entrepreneur or fellow ecosystem provider, please take a moment to get to know everybody and enjoy some good food and beverage.